Okay. That's going to show that, but not my history. Okay, fine. All right. Message.
I know, I'm hoping, so do they have the writing campus over the summer? Oh, yeah. It's all on their own. I typically have gotten dollars, but we're trying to get the authorization.
All right, whatever. Okay.
Not really. I'm not gonna be thousands of dollars in that. Just how I'm doing it.
Just itching my leg. Is Dunstan? Okay. Is cortisol? Is cortisol? Okay, good. Okay. Just a marino. Never. Weird. Search with YouTube, now it's giving you this. That's weird. Is that behind her? Yeah. Oh, yeah. You got it. Could be one or the other. I'm not sure. Ms. Gartner? Is that you, Ms.? Okay. All right, just turn that down a little bit. Good to see you all again. I guess I have to put this back on. Okay. Regarding the course projects, and some people have emailed me about it, oh, I got you. Yes, I understand that there was a typo in the syllabus. I apologize for that. It was on a page and really didn't have anything to do with the course project. It was really relating to someone who might, for religious objections, maybe religious reasons, they wouldn't go to another religion. And so I gave the option of doing an alternative project, not really a project, actually, like more of a research paper in a way. But that's passed anyway, so that's not an issue. But that's where the typo came in, that I put April 25th, and I forgot to change it to April 11th, or to put April 11th. So the due date is April 11th. However, now I don't want people to suffer because I had a typo in the syllabus, and if there was any confusion, I need to rectify that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to change the due date to the next week, April 18th. So the week from April 11th. Yes, is that acceptable? Okay. So if you are in a position where you have it all done, okay, then you have nothing to do. I would suggest that if you do have it all done, just go over it again, maybe reread your paper, whatever, or what, your answers to the questions, just quickly or whatever, to see if there's anything you could add to it, something that you look at as maybe not clear anymore, and you might need to clarify it, just so you can turn in an even better project. If you haven't done it, well, then you have the time to do it. And if you haven't gone anywhere, then go, please. I understand that some places are not very proactive, I guess you could say, in responding. So, you just have to use your own common sense. If you're trying to get in touch with someone for a week or two and they're not responding to you at all, then move on. I mean, I didn't just give you one place to go. There's a whole list of places you could go. There are other synagogues or temples to go to. There might be another mosque, although the mosque, the people at the University of Scranton, or the other mosque, are good about responding. The Hindu temple is a crapshoot. I mean, I contacted the guy who apparently runs it, but he lives in Texas. So, but he said, just show up and there'll be people there and you just ask them and that's fine. Just tell them my name and whatever. So it is possible. You probably have a better bet with the Jewish synagogue, with Judaism, or with the Zen meditation. Although I understand that even now, maybe they're overloaded, even with the Zen meditation on Zoom here on campus. I don't know if they're taking any more people for whatever reason. I think it's because they might have too many. Other than that, you have the Mormons, the Latter-day Saints, you have Jehovah's Witnesses. So I would try to do that, or I would also recommend or mention that one of the synagogues, Temple Israel, which is a conservative synagogue, is doing their services online through Facebook. So if you contact the rabbi, you can get the information on how to link up with their Facebook page and to virtually attend a service. That's acceptable because of COVID. I understand because of COVID, there are places that are still not opening. They're still not holding actual services, or at least they're holding services, but they're only restricting how many people can be there. Okay, so take that time. So it'll be April 18th. I will send out an announcement sometime later in the day, not now, obviously. Okay, let me just take one more look. I think I have everybody. Anyone new come in? Yes, yes, yes. No. Okay, moving on. Islam. Moving on to Islam. Something I said. Oh, yes, sir. Okay. Anyways, Islam. your old friend, The World, Religions, and Figures, this book that I went out and bought, which because I thought it was handy to have. There are, as of 2010 at least, as of 10 years ago, there are 1.6 billion Muslims in the world. And Muslims make up around a quarter, almost a quarter of the world's population. Say around 23% of the world's population claims adherence to this religion called Islam. So if you're doing your math, after Christianity, it is the next largest of the world religions. Christianity comes first, by far. And then after that, we have, well, I shouldn't say by far, it's 1.6, but by several hundred millions. And then after that would come Islam. You can see from this map, all the areas in green or dark green are majority Islamic areas, or I guess areas where there's a significant number of Muslims, followers of Islam. You can see that most of Islam is situated in Africa, the continent of Africa, especially Saharan and the northern part, and a little bit of sub-Saharan Africa, also here on the eastern coast. So Africa and the continent of Asia. This is all Asia, the continent of Asia. Okay. Moving over to farther Asia, like Indonesia, countries like Indonesia and Malaysia and stuff, like places like that. Interestingly, Islam is also, there are also some countries or some areas in Western Europe that are majority Muslim. For example, the country of Albania, which I had to look this up from their statistics. And in Albania, the majority of people are Muslims, 57%. 57% adhere to Islam. The country of Albania is a small country right here, just right across the ocean from Italy. And you can see with the green that other places as well. This is Macedonia, places like Serbia and Bosnia have significant numbers of Muslims, but I don't know that they're the majority as they are in Albania. So Islam actually has been in Europe for a long, long time. Well, it has been in Europe for a long, long time. When we talked about Christianity, and I told you about how Islam got up like halfway through France before being beaten back. But it has remained in Europe, I should say, to this day in countries like Albania. What is Islam? Meaning, what is the word Islam? Oh, that's interesting. A little pocket in Zaire. Although it's not called Zaire anymore. I'll have to make that change. It's called the Congo. What is Islam? Well, comes from a classical Arabic word. Classical Arabic is basically another way of saying Old Arabic, just for sake of for simplicity's sake, because there actually is technically an old form of Arabic that scholars study, but it's a very old form of Arabic. It's not modern Arabic. Classic, this old form of Arabic that was spoken during the time that Islam came about in the 7th century AD, the late 500s, early in the 600s AD, is called Classical Arabic. And this word Islam comes from that, and it's based on an Arabic root. The Semitic languages like Hebrew, Arabic is a Semitic language, it's related to Hebrew, and there are other languages. For example, Amharic, the language spoken in Ethiopia, is actually a Semitic language as well. Words are based on consonant roots. You have root consonants that come together, and then you would insert the vowels in between the consonants. And there's a logic to it, of course, of how you insert the vowels, and how you insert the vowels gives you the meaning of the word, okay? But the root consonant structure gives you the ultimate basic meaning of the word. So we have Islam, okay? Yes, it's S-L-M, because the language of Arabic, like Hebrew, is written from right to left. I don't know why, this is historically and traditionally how it's been written. So SLM, or the consonants of sin, lam, and mim. If you're curious. And what is the basic meaning of this consonant structure of SLM? I'll say SLM instead of sin, lam, mim, which are the Arabic names for those. They're not really well, they are letters. I shouldn't say that. They are letters in the Arabic alphabet, but I'll say SLM again for simplicity's sake. What is the basic meaning of this root word, SLM? Well, I give it to you there, to be safe, safety, security, well-being, to have well-being. Another way that you could understand SLM is to surrender to someone or to something, or submit, be submissive to. And throughout this root structure of these three consonants, underlying it is also this idea of peace, peacefulness. So safety and security can be synonyms for peace, okay? You don't have any troubles. You're safe, you feel secure, you have well-being, okay? Peacefulness, all right? So this idea, it fits. To surrender, to submit, you make peace with someone in a way. You might surrender to them, say, okay, you're right. Okay, I capitulate, I surrender. You're making peace with that person. So you have also that idea of peacefulness that's kind of embedded in these three consonants that are used as a word. So it is true to say, you'll hear people say this, I mean, the basic meaning has the sense of safety, security, well-being, and to surrender or submit. And the reason I have surrender and submit in bold characters and larger is because that's the common translation of the word Islam, surrender or submission, okay? But you can also find peace within these root consonants. It is there. So sometimes you'll hear people say, well, Islam is the religion of peace. It means the religion of peace. Well, that's true if you use different vowels and stuff like that. But when I looked in the Arabic dictionaries, most of the meanings had to do with being more of the idea of peacefulness. You're safe, you're secure, okay? You've surrendered, you've submitted to a situation. How could we translate Islam in a broader sense? It's submission to God. How do you achieve peace? How do you achieve safety? How do you achieve ultimate security? You give yourself over, you surrender, you submit to the mastery of God. Or another way of speaking, you could say you make peace with God. Islam, you've made peace with God by surrendering to him, to his will. And so one who does this, one who surrenders or submits to the will of God, to the authority of God, is called a Muslim. Or if you're a woman, a Muslimah, the feminine form, male or female. And you can see here the idea of the Arabic language at work, because again, notice you have the root consonants, SLM, and they add on an M at the beginning, and they have some different vowels here, and you get from Islam, which would be surrender or submission. Can also have the sense of being peaceful or being safe and having well-being, but as when it's in the sense of from a concept to a person, it's Muslim. Okay, so you would notice that now it's changed to you're relating it to a personal, or giving it a personal meaning. So that's where a Muslim, one who has submitted, one who has made peace, one could say, with God, and by extension is now at peace in his or her soul. I put it at the bottom, Muslim, because yes, that's the traditional English spelling of the word Muslim. And sometimes I forget and I go between both. There's nothing wrong with it. I mean, no one seems to be offended by it if you say Muhammad instead of Muhammad or something like that, or Quran instead of Quran. no one seems to be offended by it, so I sometimes vacillate or switch between either word, but I just wanted you to know that it's the same thing. Muslim is the same thing as a Muslim. Okay, it's not a different word, even though it's spelled a little bit differently. The essence of Islamic faith is this, the shahada. Shahada is an Arabic word which means witness or testimony. Again, like being at a court. How do I use that word? Witness. Is it Christianity that I use that? Testify. Yes, you're Protestants, really. Oh, it's not. Anyways, shahada has the meaning of giving a witness or testifying. Testimony. A witness or testimony. And what is the essential witness of Islam? Well, there you have it. There you have it. I give it to you. I testify that there is no God but God, and Muhammad is the messenger of God. I made a little mistake there on the PowerPoint. Oh well. So this is the essential creed, if you will, just like the Nicene Creed for Christians, the essential statement of belief of Islam, that there is one God only. There is absolutely one God only, no other gods, not even lesser gods. And this man, Muhammad, is God's central messenger. Not the only messenger, but he's the final and the central messenger for Muslims. So that I give you a little definition of the Shahada, the basic statement of belief in God and in his messenger, Muhammad. I should have added the oneness of God, but that'll do. That'll do for testing purposes, I guess. And this statement, the Shahada, is how you become a Muslim. Okay, just like baptism is the entrance ceremony for Christians, and circumcision is the entrance ceremony for Jews. Although Jews also do have a baptism ceremony for converts, which includes circumcision if you're a man. Yeah. That must be fun. Yeah. And Hindus, there is no entrance ceremony. If you're born from Mother India, you're a Hindu, okay? You know, although there is kind of an there is an initiation ceremony for those who are of the higher castes. So the Shahada is reciting the Shahada, proclaiming in faith this statement that you believe this, doing it before acceptable witnesses. You can't do it alone. You have to have witnesses present to hear you say it and say it properly. That is the requirement for making someone a Muslim and for entering into the Islamic community. That's it. And when I was looking up stuff for the Shahada, I wanted to find a video of it. You know, you find all these, videos of people, the moment they said Shahada, and they break down in tears and cry and all this other stuff. And this is, to convert people to Islam, to show how wonderful it is to accept Islam. But yes, I mean, that's it. That simple statement is it. In the Shahada, I give you some Arabic terms in brackets. And as I said, I made a little mistake on the PowerPoint. Well, I'm not going to correct it here because I'll have to correct it anyways on the main one. But Allah, I believe there's no God but God, Allah, okay? Allah simply means the God in Arabic, all right? So it's not really a name for God, although from my experience, a lot of Muslims will say Allah rather than God. And I don't know exactly why. I'd have to ask and dig a little bit deeper and say, why can't you just say God? Or why don't you just say God? But a lot of Muslims will just keep the Arabic word Allah, which, okay, fine. I mean, it's not a formal name. It's a statement. The God. He is the God, the only God. And Muhammad is called a Rasul. In Arabic, Rasul is a messenger, like an angel. The word angelos, or angel, means a messenger. So he is the messenger. He brings a message from God. Interesting that he's not called a prophet. Oftentimes you'll hear him referred to as the Prophet Muhammad. And in the Shahada, he's not called that. That doesn't mean he's not a prophet. Is considered a prophet of God, but they don't say he's a prophet per se. His main function is related as being a messenger, bringing a message from God in the Shahada. Maybe there's a reason for that, but again, I would have to dig deeper with an expert in. Okay, yeah, an expert. Actually, I did maybe dig deeper. All right, I'll skip over that. Maybe some of you know what this is, maybe some of you don't. I'll tell you, this is the flag of the country, the nation, the kingdom of Saudi Arabia, which is where Islam originated, okay? The kingdom of the family of Saud, hence it's called Saudi. And this is the Shahada written in calligraphic, stylish Arabic on the flag, okay? So if you look at, if you can find it in Arabic written out on the internet, you can compare, even if you don't read Arabic or know Arabic, you can kind of compare and see how it's kind of written out here in a stylized way. Okay, and then there's a sword at the bottom. Anyways, so yes, so since Saudi Arabia is the place where Islam originated, they put the very statement of faith on the flag of their country. Nah, I'll save it. Where does Islam come from? It comes from this gentleman. Islam is a founder religion. It's our second founder religion, Christianity being the first one we talked about. This man, Muhammad ibn Abdullah, who lived from around 570 AD until 632 AD, is the founder of Islam. The historical founder. Of course, Muslims would say it's always God. He's also known as the Prophet Muhammad and sometimes Ahmad, interestingly enough. He's sometimes called Ahmad, but Muhammad is his common appellation, one might say, his common name. In Arabic, his name, Muhammad, comes again from these consonantal roots, which when you take the meaning, the basic meaning has to do with praise or being praised. So his name can be translated as praiseworthy. He is praiseworthy. And Muhammad is considered the seal of the prophets. There's the belief, well, maybe I'm getting ahead of myself, but well, I'm summarizing, so it doesn't matter. The seal of the prophets. There is the belief in Islam that there has been a series of prophets that God has sent to humanity, starting with Adam, all the way with Adam, the beginning of the world, and ending with Jesus, Isa, as they call him, Jesus, Isa in Arabic. Do this. Oh, maybe I shouldn't give it to you. Make sure you're listening. Jesus. And after Jesus comes this man Muhammad, and he is the seal, like when you lick a letter and you seal a letter, okay, and it's closed. He is the seal, the last of the prophets who bring God's message to the world. Muhammad is the one who finally communicated perfectly God's revelation from God's revelation from God. God's revelation to humanity, okay? Hadn't the other prophets done so? Jesus and Moses, Adam, David, all these other previous prophets. Notice some of them are Christian and others Jews. We'll get to that in a moment. Yes, they had received God's revelation, but it always had been corrupted in some way. It wasn't perfectly received by the people. In Muhammad's case, no, it was perfectly received. And the essence of Muhammad's teaching were these four things. Belief in one God, belief that there is one messenger from God, and a final messenger, being Muhammad, one prophet. The belief that this one God, through his messenger, has given a scripture, given a divine revelation, which has been written down, a scripture, only one scripture. There aren't 4 Qurans like with the 4 Gospels. There isn't a Tanakh with 3 divisions. No, it's one book alone. And that those who believe in this one God and follow the teachings of his prophet, especially as contained in the scripture, form one community, united around that God, prophet, and scripture. So one, there's a big emphasis on unity in Islam, you can see. One God, one prophet, one book, one group. What's the background of Muhammad? I already told you, around 570 AD, he was born in the city of Mecca, or as it's called in Arabic, Makkah. So you'll see both forms, but in English it came into English as Mecca. And on this map of the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, the Arabian Peninsula, a peninsula is a big piece of land which is surrounded on 3 sides by water. So you have, what is this? Is the Red Sea and the Arabian Sea and the Persian Gulf, I think this is. And so it's a big peninsula surrounded on 3 sides. Okay, here's where the city of Mecca is in Saudi Arabia. It's an okay picture, but the words are a little bit hard to say, but that's Mecca in red. Red and blue. And so he was born there. Mecca was a prosperous city that was situated along trading routes from the Indian Ocean to the Mediterranean. And you might be able to see this or kind of figure this out on your own, just looking at it. This, the Arabian Sea, but it's part of a larger ocean called the Indian Ocean. And unless people were sailing, people were usually walking at this time. So, Mecca was right here on the coastline of the peninsula. So people would walk along the coastline. Why not just go from point A to point B, which is shorter, because this is all desert. This is just complete barren, searingly hot desert. So no one wanted to do that. So, I mean, you could, there might be routes that you could go, but people would go along the coastline, and so Mecca was uniquely situated uniquely situated to be a prosperous city because everyone would want to stay there. Rest their feet, get some water, get some food, relax, pray to their gods, take time to pray and do religious services. So it was on this trade route, and it was also a religious center. And it had a very famous center of worship, which is apparently still there today. This thing called the Kaaba, which I'll get to in a moment, where everyone could bring his idols of all kinds, all different gods and goddesses, and bring them to this place in Mecca where they could worship them. So Mecca was full of idols and shrines. This Kaaba structure, which I give you the definition there, this Kaaba structure, which means cube from Arabic. We get that from Arabic, cube. It's a cube. That's a 3-dimensional square. It's a cube. So this Kaaba, this cube structure, was the most prominent and the greatest of these shrines. It's an ancient sanctuary. It predates, as you might guess, because I mentioned it, it predates the birth of Muhammad. So Muhammad did not create the Kaaba, even though it's part of Islam now. And one of the most famous features of the Kaaba, other than all the idols that had once been kept in it, was that it has in one of the corners or the sides, I should say, has a black stone embedded in it, which no one is exactly sure what it is. The best guess is that it's probably a meteorite, piece of space rock that penetrated the atmosphere and struck the earth, which is called a meteorite. And but it survived burning up. It didn't fully burn up, and then people a long time ago took it and made it an object of veneration because it came from above. It came from the transcendent realm where the gods and the spirits are. So it was sacred. And so that was made part of the Kaaba, and that also is still there today. Many of the tribes in Arabia at the time of Muhammad were polytheistic. They believed in many gods. Polytheism, monotheism, monos means one or singular, and polus in Greek means many. So you probably already know this word. You've seen it. You know, something is, well, I mean, I'm trying to think of something that we commonly use, but I'm thinking polyvalent, which can mean multiple meanings, but polychromatic, which means multiple colors. But there might be other stuff that, polygon. What is it called? Is it records? Yeah, that was the name of a record company, I think. It's not going to work. Anyways, polus means, excuse me, not the S. Polus in Greek means many, so many gods. So in Arabia, they worship many gods, many spirits, genies. That's where genies comes from. Jinn. Jinn are these, they're not gods, but they're spirits of the desert called jinn. Who usually seem to be malevolent. They usually don't want to encounter a jinn. They're usually tricksters or not meaning well towards you. So you want to stay away from jinn. But there are these spirits called jinn in addition to the gods. And according to tradition, or what people have said, the Kaaba itself contained almost 400 idols and shrines to the gods. Not sure how they stuffed them all in there, but that's what people say. However, archaeologists who have done archaeological digs and work on the Arabian Peninsula do seem to believe that there was some evidence of belief in a supreme God. And you do find this in a lot of the world's religions, even like Hinduism. Sometimes there is a supreme God or number of gods, but there are many other gods recognized, kind of like lower gods. And this God was, don't you know, called Allah. Okay? So they do find references to the God, this God Allah, who seemed to have been the supreme God over all the other divinities and spirits in the Arabian Peninsula. But there were exceptions to the general polytheism, because remember, we're talking here about this. Well, with Muhammad's birth, we're talking here about the 6th century AD. Anno Domini, yes, the year of our Lord, Jesus. We're not talking, when we talk about not everyone was a believer in the many gods and goddesses, because you had Jews and Christians. I'll talk about them in a moment. There were these groups in the Arabian Peninsula known as Hanifs, who were not Jews and Christians. I'll come to that in a moment. But there were these groups that were also amongst the various tribes and clans that lived on the Arabian Peninsula, and they are given this word Hanif. They're mentioned in the Quran, the religious book of Islam. And as far as we can tell, they seem to be monotheists. Okay, they weren't polytheists. They were the exceptions that proved the rule. They believed in one God. They were living on the Arabian Peninsula, and they had rejected the idolatrous practices of the other tribes. These groups called Hanifs also, very interestingly, claimed to have some lineage to this man Abraham, whom we might have heard before. Ibrahim, they called him. Remember, we heard about this man Abraham, or Ibrahim, according to them, who was the ancient father of the Jews. He was the man called by God. He was the man called by God, who received the covenant of circumcision from God, It was from Abraham's children that eventually you have Jacob, who is given the name Israel, and you get the sons and daughters of Israel, and eventually you get the Jews, okay? So it's interesting. The Hanifs were monotheists, and they claimed that they had received their monotheism from this man Abraham, who had the connection, who was connected to the Jewish people. It's not very hardly stated. It's the Middle East. So right up here you have Israel, okay? Judaism. So it's not surprising that some of the ideas might have both filtered down into the Arabian Peninsula, but also some ideas might have filtered up, and there might have been mutual influencing, maybe more influencing from the Jews, since it's their patriarch Abraham that these Hanifs were saying they believed in and got their idea in monotheism from. We know that there were Jews and Christians in the area. Even in Islamic history, they're mentioned. In the history of Muhammad, they're mentioned. And there were many Jews who had settled in and around a city that was just north of Mecca. Going back to my map, here's Mecca, and up here, surrounded and encircled in blue, is the city of Medina, we'll talk about in a moment. This is another large city to the north of Mecca, and there was a large population of Jewish tribes, clans that were living there. There apparently were also Christians living in the desert, maybe Christian ascetics like monks who were living throughout the area. So we know there were Jews and Christians in the area. Jews were in Medina, we know that, and there were Christians in that area in the desert. But I mean, again, it was surrounded by Christians. You had Christians from the Byzantine Empire. Remember the Byzantine Empire? In Constantinople and modern Turkey, that whole area was dominated by the Byzantine Empire, which was Christian. You had Christians right across the Red Sea in places like Ethiopia. So Christians and Jews were in the area. At the age of 25, I should mention that it was in the textbook. Well, it's in the textbook. By the way, I was surprised when the textbook is kind of so scanty on the life of Muhammad. I would have thought they would have devoted much more detail and information to his life, but take what you can and supplement it with what I'm giving you here, because I didn't think the section on Muhammad was done particularly well in the textbook, to be honest. So around the age of 25, Muhammad becomes a leader of caravans, traders, people with camels, and they throw the stuff on the camels and they transport it from here to there to sell it, and then they buy stuff, and okay, so they're traders, okay? These are caravans of traders, so that's what he does, and he becomes a leader for a businesswoman named Khadija. She's very important because she becomes his wife later. But interesting that she's a businesswoman, because consider the time period and the fact that she's a woman and the culture she's in. But nevertheless, she had her own business of caravan trading. Muhammad later marries her, Khadija, and has, a few sons, which die in infancy, unfortunately. He has a bunch of daughters, maybe he has 2 or 3 sons which die. He has he has 4 daughters from Khadija. This picture I have here is from a later Islamic book, a history book, that was written much later, I think the 1400s. And this is a picture of Ibrahim, in the Muslim tradition, how they think he might have looked. Of course, no one knows. And this is from the story where Abraham is asked by God to sacrifice his son Isaac. So you see the knife around his neck. But God stops him. God sends an angel. This is an angel who is sent by God to stop him, and instead he sacrifices this ram. Okay, so just to show you that Abraham is honored. Oh, the Hanifs, I forgot about that quote. Yes, I told you the Hanifs are mentioned in the Quran, and here's one of those places in Quran, Surah 3, Surah just means a chapter, so I'll say chapter. In Quran chapter 3, verse 67, there's a mentioning of the fact that of Abraham and the fact that he was a Hanif. Certainly the Hanifs believed he was their forefather. Abraham was not a Jew or yet a Christian. He was not even a Christian. But he was an upright man, Hanifan. He was an upright man who had surrendered. So he was also a Muslim. And he was not of the idolaters. Okay, so here we have a twofold designation, or a twofold designation. Abraham is identified not only as a believer, a righteous man, a believer in the one God. He was not an idolater. He believed in one God, Hanif, and he's also identified as a Muslim. So he had surrendered or submitted to this one God. But you can also note that there's a denial here that Abraham was a Jew or a Christian. Well, certainly Abraham was not a Christian, but most certainly Abraham wasn't a Jew in the sense that later on the term Jew is used to describe his children, his descendants, but certainly he was the forefather of the Jews. So you see here kind of this decision to already early on in Islam to kind of separate out these figures, Abraham, Jesus, and they're no longer even like the possession of Judaism or Christianity anymore. They're us. They were Muslims like us. They weren't really Jews or Christians, which can have some negative consequences. In the year, or around the year, I should say, because in the ancient, a long time ago, nothing is completely definite because nobody was there taking notes, like now. So around the year 610 AD, a major event occurs in the life of Muhammad, which is called the Night of Power, Al-Lailat al-Qadr in Arabic, the Night of Power. Muhammad seems to have been a searcher, a seeker, and he felt the need to search, and he wanted to search for the truth about God. He was restless. He apparently wasn't satisfied with the religious offerings in the Kaaba or generally amongst his people. And so he liked to spend time alone in the desert, especially in this place, this mountain that was near the city of Mecca called Mount Hira. This is a picture of Mount Hira, the mountain. And there are caves in Mount Hira and stuff like that. And you can even see the cave. I have a picture of it. I didn't put it on here. I should have. But anyways, you can even see the cave where traditionally it is said that Muhammad has this experience of the spiritual experience called the Night of Power. So what happens? Muhammad is alone in this cave, doing praying, meditating, whatever, being alone, thinking about God. And he has a strong sense of a presence, which he later described it as an angel named Jibril or Gabriel. By now, I think you should have started already noticing a lot of the connections between Islam and Christianity and Judaism. I mean, the same characters are appearing, Gabriel is the angel that God sends to Mary, the mother of Jesus, for the virgin birth. Gabriel announces to Mary, this Jewish woman, hey, you're going to give birth to the Messiah, okay, through the power of God. So here, Gabriel, shows up again in the case of Muhammad. And Gabriel accosts Muhammad, he gets in his face. I don't know if he physically grabs him, but he gets in his face in a manner of speaking and tells Muhammad to recite, commands him, recite. And Muhammad's like, what am I supposed to recite? What do you want me to do? But then he understands, because he has like a vision of some sort, but in his mind's eye, he can see this revelation of words in front of him, which he is then forced to recite. This is God's revelation that he sees before him, and so he recites it. And it continues happening. From this moment on, Muhammad starts going into ecstasies where he's receiving these visions of Arabic poetry, basically, classical Arabic poetry, that he has to recite. And apparently this poetry is written by God. Not apparently coming up with it himself. This is stuff that's been written down by God, and he is just reciting it. Now, Muhammad thought he was going crazy. According to the story, this was not a good thing for Muhammad, a good time. He thought he was going insane. He was losing his mind. And the people around him also thought, well, they didn't necessarily think he was insane, but they thought maybe he was possessed by a jinn, a spirit or something, because he was acting weird. And here we come back to that wonderful woman, Khadija, whom he married, because she was a good wife and she stood by him. You know, he tells her this is an issue, this is something that's going on that he's dealing with. And she doesn't freak out. She doesn't reject him. She says, okay. What does she do? And you can read this story in one of the readings that I gave you for Islam is a hadith, a traditional story that's been passed down that describes what she does for him and the outcome. But I'm going to tell it to you now, just summarize it. She advises him that he needs to test the truth of what he's experienced. Okay, she takes it for what it's worth. She doesn't think he's crazy. She accepts he's saying, this is what's going on. I'm experiencing these things. But we need to test it. So she brings him to an ascetic, a man who's living out in the desert. You know, an ascetic, it's like spiritual exercise in a way. Fasting, eating very little, praying a lot, thinking about God a lot, being alone a lot, so you can focus all your energies on thinking about God a lot, okay? So there's a guy, a dude who's living out, that Khadija knows is living out in the desert, apparently a holy man. I think he might have also been her cousin, but I have to go back and read the story. But anyways, she brings Muhammad to him for spiritual advice. You know, Khadija's view is like, okay, if it's not from God, you know, we'll jump off that bridge when we come to it. We'll figure out what to do. But if it is from God, we need to test this. We need to know. So she brings him to this holy man, who advises Muhammad that if this is from God, then it's God's work, and you know you shouldn't resist it. You should just go with it. If you really believe this is from God, and this is not like, you know, you're a psychopath, you know, you're losing your mind. Now, the interesting thing about that encounter is that this ascetic, this holy man living out in the desert, was a Christian. He was a believer in Christ. So again, you see this interconnectedness between Islam, Christianity, Judaism. Muhammad decides that the Night of Power was a true experience, that God had communicated something to him, and that he was now forced, in a way, to proclaim the message. So he starts preaching the message he's been being given, that he believed he had been given. And the essence, basically, of this early message of Muhammad was the oneness of God, that he takes this main figure from Arabian theology, the group of spirits and gods. There's this main figure, Allah, and says, no, Allah is really the only God. All these other gods and spirits are nothing. They don't exist. So the idea of monotheism, he preaches monotheism against the polytheism of the tribes. And he says, you must submit to this one God. You must put away your idols. And he gained a few followers. So he started gaining a few followers. But as you can imagine, I mean, with his message, it was kind of against the status quo. People don't like being told what to do or told that they're wrong. So there was a general opposition to his preaching against polytheism. But it also, there were economic issues, because having a major shrine there, the Kaaba, brought people in, you know, it was good for business. And a lot of them were businessmen. It brought people in. This is a place, again, where they could worship their gods, and while they're doing that, worshiping their gods and goddesses and their stone and wooden idols, oh, maybe I can sell you a falafel. You know, maybe you can, hey, stay in my house, my B&B on the roof, and you can, you know, take some time off from your travels. So there were economic issues, and if you just got rid of the Kaaba and all the idols and stuff, people would have, why would anyone come here? We're just a dusty, hot desert city, you know? He's taking away our secret sauce, in a manner of speaking. So there was general opposition by the traders and merchants, because they benefited from these pilgrimages that people made to the shrines in Mecca. They made money off of them. It's kind of like when Luther went after indulgences, yes? It's like the Pope needed money, and here's this priest saying, no. You know, that's, you know, he didn't like that. So Muhammad and his followers were at first, they kind of had to live in a ghetto in a small section of the city to stay away from people and also to protect each other. And Muhammad himself, I mean, he was an orphan. Remember this from the textbook. You know, his mother and father died apparently rather early, so he was an orphan. And he was taken in by his uncle. Well, his uncle had power in the community. He was powerful in his own tribe. So while his uncle was alive, he was protected. People wouldn't really touch Muhammad, even if he was touching nerves, bumps, you know. And also Khadija, his wife, was powerful because she was a businesswoman. She had some bling, you know. She had some money. So as long as they were alive, he was fine. But they both die, and they die before Muhammad. So now Muhammad's protection is gone. It's just him and his few followers. So what do? Oh, actually, I'll go back to that. What do? They get out of town. They get out of town. Before they get out of town, I just want to show you this, just to show you. I think this might be one of the readings, but in chapter 96 of the Quran, you have this chapter which is called the clot of blood traditionally. It's not clear how to translate the Arabic word that's used, but traditionally it's called the clot of blood. Quran chapter 96. This is believed to be the revelation that Muhammad was first given on the night of power. This was what Jibreel told him to recite. Recite, Ikra, in Arabic. In the name of your Lord who created man from a clinging substance, an alakin. Recite, and your Lord is the most generous, who taught by the pen, taught man that which he knew not. Okay, and then it goes on. It's not very long, but I'm just giving you the first opening lines of it. So here you have recite, and this will become the name for the scripture. Ikra from Arabic. Again, notice the root consonants, Q and R, will become Quran, the recitation of these revelations he's receiving from God. This idea that God created man and woman, of course, from a clinging substance, which traditionally has been translated as a clot, a blood clot. Well, the Arabic word, you know, who knows? It's too unclear. It's not clear what it means. Something that's clinging, some substance that clings, which could be coagulated blood, could also be another substance by which human beings are created, but I'm not going to get into that. And then he goes on like God gives knowledge. And I mean, the rest of it is, you know, God is generous. He teaches by the pen. He teaches men what they don't know. Okay, so again, this revelation, God, he's the messenger. God is teaching people what they don't know, because before this, before the night of power, Muslims refer to that as the time of ignorance, of not knowing. But now with God bringing his revelation to Muhammad, it's now the time of knowing. He teaches us what we did not know, we were ignorant of. Okay, so 622 AD, Muhammad and his followers decide that it's just too dangerous to stay in Mecca, so they have to get out of town. And this event is called, in English, it's come down to us as the Hijra. In Arabic, it's called Al-Hijra. And so you'll see both terms, okay? You'll see people call it the Hijra or the Hijra. I'll stick with the traditional term, the Hijra. And Hijra simply means to emigrate, to go out of, ex migro, you know, like an immigrant is someone who goes into. An emigrant is someone who goes out of into someplace else. So they are going out of Mecca and going to the city I've already mentioned, Medina, which was not called Medina at the time. It was actually called Yathrib. How does it get to be called Medina? Well, I'm going to tell you that story. In Yathrib, there was a division amongst the people. You had various clans and tribes living there. Some of them were the polytheistic Arab tribes. Others were monotheistic Jews. I don't know if there were very many or any Christians in Yathrib, but there were certainly Jews and the other polytheistic tribes. And so there was a lot of tension in the city. It was a divided city. And so some people in Yathrib had accepted Muhammad's message. They had heard it and they accepted it, And they made a proposal to the community to ask Muhammad to come in as kind of like a neutral third party to arbitrate for them their differences, which he did do, and he did a good job. So secretly, over a period of time, little numbers of Muhammad's membership would leave Mecca, not to make it too obvious what was going on. They didn't want people to find out that they were trying to get out of town and try to stop them or kill them or whatever. So little by little, and then finally Muhammad himself goes up to Yathrib to establish himself there, to bring unity to that city. So Muhammad and around 70 of his followers leave Mecca and go to Yathrib. And for Islamic history, this emigration marks the beginning of Islam properly speaking, and to the point that they date their calendar by this event, not by the birth of Muhammad, not by the night of power, but this event, the emigration of Muhammad and his followers to Yathrib. So in Latin, it's called, like we have Anno Domini, in Latin it's called Anno Hejire, the year of the Hejira, which was in 622 AD, so do the math. So at least according to the internet, we are now in the time of 1,443 years since the Hejira, which we would say is 2,022 years since the birth of Christ, the Lord. So for Muslims, it's the year 1443. And if you go to an Islamic country like Saudi Arabia, Indonesia, other places, certainly if you go to a mosque, that's the date. They're it's 1443 for them. It's not 2022 because they date their calendars differently. Not just their religious calendar. This is their secular calendar too. What happens in Yathrib? Well, first of all, how do we get from Yathrib to Medina? Because Muhammad is such a successful leader and an arbitrator at Yathrib, they actually rename the city. Well, maybe they don't rename the city, but at least the Muslims rename it for them. It becomes the city of the Prophet, Madinat al-Nabi. Okay, the word Medina in classical Arabic just means a town or a city, and Nabi is the word for a prophet. I might have given this Hebrew word during Judaism, but nevertheless, it means prophet. So, city of the Prophet, aka Medina for short. So that's how it gets the name of Medina. So Medina really isn't a name for the place. It's a title they gave it. It's Yathrib, the city of the Prophet, which then just simply becomes Medina, the city. It is in Medina that the community gets organized, the Ummah, the Ummah. Ummah is essentially like church for Christianity. The church, the community of those who believe in Jesus. Ummah is the community of those who believe in the message of Muhammad. Okay, they're Muslim, and Muslimah, Muslimun, I'm trying to think of the plural, is Muslimun, I think for masculine, and Muslimat for feminine. But they are the ones who have they've received the message of Muhammad and submitted themselves to God, the one God. Yeah, see there I have the traditional version of his name, Muhammad, rather than Muhammad. It's all right. It's in Medina that the Muslim community becomes fully organized. I mean, they have some breathing space. They're not in fear for their lives. So, that Muhammad can start making decisions about how he wants his community to be organized. And so Muhammad is now the religious and even a political leader in the city. And this is where we find that Islam's main ritual forms come into play. So, for example, prayer, the regular cycle of prayer throughout the day that Muslims do, even today, of course. Almsgiving, giving money to the poor, to those in need. Fasting during Ramadan. And right now, it's Ramadan, yes? Ramadan has begun for Muslims. It's interesting that this is one of the few times now, that it happens, because Ramadan moves all over the place throughout the year, and Jewish Passover also moves somewhat. It's almost always in the spring, but it moves somewhat. Well, I should say it is always in the spring, but it moves around. But here we have the coming together this year, 2022, of Ramadan, Jewish Passover, and the Christian Passover, Easter, interestingly, these three world religions. So Ramadan, this idea of having a month of fasting, starts to come into play as well. Pilgrimage to Mecca, which is not going to happen for a while because Mecca is hostile to Muhammad and his followers at the time. And Hadith, people start collecting or remembering. This is where we trace Hadith stories about how Muhammad interpreted the revelations he was receiving from God. The Jews in Medina were united to some extent with those clans and tribes that accepted Muhammad's revelation. They were not Muslims. They did not follow Muhammad. They did not believe he was a prophet of God. Okay, even though he claimed as such and claimed to be a prophet of the same God that the Jews worship. But they nevertheless didn't necessarily oppose him. But the fact that Medinan Jews, the Jews of Medina, would not accept him as a prophet and then began to mock his revelations, saying he had a new revelation from God. Well, no, we have the Torah from Moses. We don't need a new revelation. And then they began to actively oppose him within the community. So they started to challenge Muhammad's authority in Medina. And so we can see a little bit in the Quran, in the scripture of Islam, where Muhammad starts becoming increasingly bitter with the Jews, kicks some of them out. He expels some Jewish tribes from the city and even kills others. And I say some problems, and I say, see Quran chapter 2. It's an interesting little verse if you want to go look at it, if you find it on the internet or whatever. I'm just going to tell you what it's about. But originally, to show his continuity in the continuity of his community with the previous revelations God had given through Abraham, okay, the Jewish forefather, the original Ummah of Muslims prayed toward Jerusalem. They didn't pray towards Mecca. Jerusalem was their holy city. That was the city of David, also one of the prophets of God. So they prayed there. But once the Jews in Medina say, we ain't accepting your message under no circumstances, you are not a prophet of God, he rejects them and tells his followers in Quran chapter 2, we have this record of him he receives a revelation from God, which tells the group to stop praying to Jerusalem. Don't pray there anymore. Pray to Muhammad's hometown of Mecca now. But don't pray to Jerusalem anymore. Now, this actually created a little bit of a problem in the community because the revelations from God were considered perfect. And so some in his group said, well, Muhammad, God is perfect, always perfect, and tells us perfectly what to do. Why did he tell us to do the wrong thing? Why was it proper to pray to Jerusalem now, but now it's wrong? And, of course, if you look at the background, if you're a religious studies scholar, you say, well, there was this butting of heads with the Jewish groups in the area, and he was angry. But, according to Muslim theology, no, God can't be wrong, and his prophet can't be wrong. So it was a test. God was seeing how obedient the Muslims, the members of the Ummah, would be to Muhammad by praying to Jerusalem. And now, after God having told them to do that, to tell them something completely the opposite, so don't pray there anymore, just pray to Mecca. Once Muhammad and his followers became strong enough, they started organizing armed raids on those caravans that were moving through the area, especially going to Mecca. They wanted to basically start starving Mecca of its profits, cutting off its blood supply in a way, its economic blood supply, because he wanted to take Mecca. He wanted to go back there. And so over a period of time, that's what he and his group start doing. They start kind of raiding the caravans that were coming out of Mecca or going towards Mecca. And eventually his group was successful. I mean, not in the sense that they completely destroyed, there was a big war and they destroyed Mecca. No, but just, through a war of attrition, by constantly being a pest and harassing the caravans. Finally, the Meccans, the leaders of Mecca decided, we can't fight this guy anymore. You know, he's just too much of a pest. You have to make peace with him, you know, because he might wipe us out. And so what happens in 630 AD is that Muhammad does launch an attack on Mecca. He shows up to fight, and there's basically little resistance. So like, okay, you know, we're not going to fight. They saw, I guess that it was going to be a losing battle. And so Muhammad comes in triumphant. And the first thing he does, according to the story, is go to the Kaaba and remove all the idols and the pagan symbols and get rid of them. Say, we have to now put this away. So he goes back to his original message, which is the oneness of God and no idol worship. There's only one God. So he just laser focused. He goes right to the Kaaba, says, clear it out. He doesn't get rid of the Kaaba, but he says, clear it out of all the idols. And he formally declares that Mecca is a city dedicated only to Allah. And then he did something that was really politically smart, you know, and he was a politically smart guy, as Yathrib showed, the situation in Yathrib. He doesn't massacre all of his enemies. He doesn't have a blood feud and say, okay, you did things to me when I was here in Mecca, when I was weak, and now you're weak and I'm in power, I'm powerful. No, he says, as long as you accept Islam, there'll be total amnesty for everybody, anyone who had fought against him and his believers, as long as you accept Islam, which seemed like a good bargain. So they say, yes, praise be Allah. You know, we accept, they make the Shahada and they accept Islam. So this is called the conquest of Mecca. And again, in one of these later history books, we have a picture here of Muhammad riding in with his followers, okay, on this favorite, I guess, horse or donkey that they like to ride on, whatever, surrounded by angels. And you can notice how Muhammad is depicted, because Muhammad took over, like, from the Jews, the idea that God should not be depicted by symbols, so no idols or stuff like that. But this also kind of extended to sacred figures like himself and other prophets. So while in Islamic pictures, they'll still draw the body of Muhammad a lot of times, not always, but a lot of times they will not draw the face. They'll draw everything else and they'll leave the face blank. Again, not always. You'll sometimes see pictures with Muhammad's face, but a lot of times they won't. And also, just one little thing to mention, that he's surrounded in a cone of fire. And this is just a cultural thing. You see this in a lot of religions when you have sacred people or things. Like in Christianity, a person who is considered holy will have a halo, this circular thing of light around their head. You also see that in Buddhism. The Buddha is shown with this circular halo or the circular thing around his head. They don't call it a halo, but anyways, I'll talk about that when I get to Buddhism, hopefully. Here in Islam, the cultural form is to be surrounded in fire. So a lot of times you'll see holy people like the prophets, sacred people will have flames of fire coming out of their heads. It doesn't mean literally, okay? It's just like a halo for a saint. Muhammad conquers Mecca, and 2 years later, not a long time later, he dies, 632 AD. But before he dies, there is recorded a farewell sermon, and there you have a definition of it. He gives this little discourse, and there are some versions of it. They're more or less the same from what I could tell. Some are short, some are a little bit longer, but whatever. Basically, in his farewell sermon, Muhammad kind of reminds him of some of the basic things he's told them, like don't have blood feuds, don't get revenge on each other, don't take interest on loans. Apparently that was a big problem. Treat your wives appropriately and well. Don't abuse your wives. Again, that must have been another problem in the culture. And finally, he says, follow the book of Allah which I have received. Not even sure there was a book at the time. So maybe the story, it's showing that some later details are being added to the story. But nevertheless, say you have to believe in and follow the book of Allah that I've received, which would be the Quran, the sacred scripture. So that's what he's leaving leaving them. That the blue section, just to explain, I don't know if I'm going to go over it or not, but anyway, this is a little, this is actually a little fragment, a little piece of part of what's called the farewell sermon, at least according to one version. And Muhammad basically asks his followers, how will you remember me on the day of judgment when the world comes to an end? How will you remember me? And they say, we'll remember you as this. We'll bear witness. Shahada, again, shahada. We'll bear witness that you have conveyed the message. You gave the message properly. You discharged your ministry properly. You have given wise counsel. Okay. They'll actually forget all of this after Muhammad is dead, but that's for another lecture. Anyways, but yeah, so yes, we'll vouch for you, Muhammad, that you gave the message correctly, you did what a prophet should do, and you were a wise prophet to boot. And Muhammad says, okay, but Allah be the witness, Allah be the witness, Allah be the witness. So you better say that when the world comes to an end. Muhammad dies. There is one problem that will become immediately apparent that we did not see with Jesus. Remember, Jesus left an authority structure, yes? He had the foresight to choose 12 men. Yes, one of them betrayed him and went on, but they chose another and they got back to 12. But Jesus left pretty much left an authority structure. Muhammad did not. Muhammad gave no indication of how the community was supposed to continue after he was gone, if there's going to be another prophet who would succeed him, if there would be someone who's not a prophet but would be the interpreter of his will for later on. Nothing. He just dies. And so we'll find out next week what happens because of that. God bless you all. Have a good weekend. Let's see here. Oh, you too. Thank you, Ms. Brooks. Well, see what happens. Yeah. La da 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 da. La dee dee doo. La da da. Make that correction. Whoops. Hello, ladies. I thought it was, but apparently not. Okay.